Hey everybody, welcome back. We're still in Genesis chapter 6. We're starting in verse number 5 this morning. So while you're opening up your Bibles to get there, let's just take a quick little second to recap what we've studied so far in the first 4 verses of this chapter. We saw that approximately 1,000 plus years have gone past in Genesis chapter number 5. In fact, it was 1,556 years to be exact. But at some point in chapter 6, God says that things aren't looking so good. And we saw that the fallen angelic host, the ones that rebelled against God and followed Lucifer from heaven, these ones took on the forms of men and began cohabiting with human women, and you were having demonic human interactions, and the offspring were something not human, not fully human, and not angelic either, a hybrid of sorts, taking the DNA of human women and the DNA of angelic beings, and these Nephilim were born as a result, who became giants and mighty men of renown back in the day. And we talked quite a bit about that last time, and there's a lot more we could say, but that's really sufficient, I think, to at least get us an idea that we're having intentional demonic manipulation of human DNA. And the point of that whole exercise, I believe, is not because these fallen angels couldn't contain themselves and these human women were just so beautiful. That's not it at all. This is an intentional act, an intentional series of acts in order to overthrow the human race and ultimately to overthrow the prophecy that God had made in Genesis chapter number 3 about the destruction of the devil by the seed of the woman. And so I think if you take this to its natural conclusion, the diluting of the human DNA gene pool and the infiltrating of it with foreign DNA ends up making eventually a race of beings that are not fully human at all. And so God sees all of this, and we get to where we are in verse number 5. So that's kind of where we left off last time. Verse 5 now says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." So the world had turned pretty bad in 1,500 plus years. And now, of course, you're having this demonic attack on the human DNA. Verse 6 says, "And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." So God was grieved at what was going on. And it says it repented the Lord that he had made man. In other words, God was sorry that he had made man because of what this situation had turned into. And yet, this is the vehicle that God knew was going to happen all along. Well, as we talked about back in Genesis chapter number 3, God has never had a plan B, never will have a plan B. God's plans are always perfect, and they're always right from the start to accomplish what it is he's trying to do. And if there's not the fall of man, then the grace of God can never be revealed. The grace of God, God giving what is not deserved, can never be revealed. But through the cross, through the fall of man, and ultimately through the cross of Jesus Christ, the grace of God has shone forth in darkness and has led many sons to glory. And it is by the grace of God that we're saved. We're not saved by anything else. And you can read that in Ephesians chapter number 2, starting in verse number 8. "For by grace are ye saved through faith." Okay, so understand that while it's recorded here that God was sorry that he made man and it really grieved him at his heart, all that is true. But all of that is still, the way that God had foreseen it and foreknown it before he ever created anything. And before you go, well, wait a minute, are you a nut? Why am I even listening to you? Well, I've got better things to do, like go fry a chicken or something. understand that the Bible describes Jesus Christ in many different ways, but one of them is he was the lamb slain before the foundation of the earth. Do you understand what that says? And this is in the writings in the New Testament. Jesus Christ was the lamb slain before the foundation of the earth. In other words, before God ever created anything in Genesis, before God created anything, Jesus was already going to be a lamb that had to be slain for the sins of men. But there wasn't a man even made yet. There wasn't a fall yet. There wasn't even an earth yet. And Jesus Christ was already, as far as God was concerned, a lamb slain. This was what God had planned all along. And so it shouldn't surprise us that the Bible describes Jesus that way. And by the way, we all know that there's about 1/3 of the Bible. It's estimated that about 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy. Well, prophecy is the foretelling of future events before they happen. And God, of course, is the only one that can do that. He says that quite clearly in the book of Isaiah, that there is none other that can tell the beginning from the end except him. And so if God can see the future when nobody else can, then clearly God could see this before he ever created man, which he clearly did, which is why Jesus was already a lamb slain before the foundation of the world. God could have intervened. He could have stepped out in the garden and stopped the attack on Eve that Satan was making when he launched that attack that we read about in Genesis 3. But he didn't do all that, even though he knew it was happening and knew it was going to happen. This was the way that God was going to show forth his grace. There are many facets and aspects to who God is. This is one way, or this is the way that God chose to do it. So, verse 7, and the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. Now, if there was a period there, and that was the end of that, then, I guess there wouldn't be any mankind today. But that was never the plan of God. The plan of God was to shine forth with his grace. Okay, so judgment's going to come in, but grace is going to somehow survive it. And we're going to see how that works. So God said, I will destroy man from whom I've created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air. For it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So God found and singled out Noah and shown his grace upon Noah so that Noah wasn't going to die along with the rest of humanity. He was going to continue. So, verse 9 says, by the way, we'll get to why Noah in a second. Verse 9 says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Now, Noah was a just man, which means he was a good man. He was a godly man. And we saw that the line of Seth was a godly line, and we saw that in chapter number 5, that Enoch was taken out by God and removed from the planet by God, because he had other plans for him, as we discussed. But this is a godly line of people, and Noah is a godly man. And you'll notice that it says, and he was perfect in his generations. Perfect. Well, what does that mean? Your Bible might say blameless. It certainly does not say, or should not say, sinless. If it does, you need to scrap that thing. Because the word perfect here does not mean the word sinless. Because Noah had sin too. He was born from the fallen line of Adam and Eve, and everybody was born with sin. So that doesn't mean he was sinless. But the word perfect means that he's pure. Huh? What does that mean? Doesn't that mean sinless? Well, no, that doesn't mean that. Not in the way that it's used here. In other words, what we have here ties back to what's been happening in the beginning of Genesis chapter 6, with the human DNA pool being diluted and polluted and turned into a hybrid race. Noah's family line and Noah's DNA was still pure. He was 100% human. There was no infiltration of the angelic DNA into Noah. There wasn't some sort of a hybrid that was in Noah's blood or his DNA. He was pure. He was completely human. This is what God had to do to preserve the human race. If God doesn't do this, then that human DNA, which has been polluted with angelic DNA, is going to spread to the entire population, and there won't be a human left. Not one purely human being left. Noah is still pure. He is perfect in his generations, which means his bloodline had not been tainted. And this is what God needed. And so, Noah begat 3 sons. Shem, Ham, and Japheth were the 3 boys. And we saw back in Genesis chapter number 5 in the last verse that he was 500 years old. And he begat these 3 boys of his. So at 500 years, he is the father of these boys. Now, look at verse 11. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. It was corrupt, it was polluted, and we've already been talking about this DNA stuff for quite a long time, but it's also corrupt in its moral moorings, its moral bearings. It has lost its godly heritage that was passed along to Adam and Eve, and it just went down and got lost down the line. Except for the line of Seth. The line of Seth continued in a godly manner. But the earth as a whole was corrupt before God, and it was filled with violence. Let me tell you something, folks, that's just like today. That's just like today. Today is we live in a backward, corrupt world that's after everybody's own interest. They don't care about the next guy and who they have to step on to be able to get ahead. They don't care if they have to get physical and violent about it, if they have to pull a weapon. That's the world we live in today. It's a bad place, and I feel bad for our children and our grandchildren because they're growing up in a much harsher world than we did. And it's only going to get worse. But this is exactly what Jesus said was going to happen before the end times came. That the world would revert back to the way it was in the days of Noah. So all of this stuff that we're reading here, violence and the evil thoughts and the imaginations of the hearts of men are going to be only continually before man. That is exactly what we're seeing and living in today. But I believe that the pollution of the human DNA is also back, because that's what was happening also in the days of Noah. Now, that's a whole nother subject for another day, and I really don't want to divert this study to go into that. But understand that there was much demonic involvement in the human race in the days of Noah, and there is much fallen angel demonic involvement in our world today. And we talked about this briefly last time, I believe, when we were together studying the first part of this chapter. So now we get to verse number 12. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. The ways that we talked about, all these different ways are corrupt in all the flesh. Noah, however, is still clean and pure. Now, verse 13, and God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Notice that God is going to destroy them, and he's going to use the earth to do it, and the earth is also going to be destroyed. Now, not in the way that it's not going to exist anymore, but the earth that existed before the flood is not the same earth that existed after the flood. We talked about this a little bit back when we were going through the creation account in chapter 1. and maybe even a little bit in chapter 2. But the earth and the conditions of the earth were very, very different before the flood than they were after the flood. And this is, I believe, what God is talking about here when he says, I will destroy them with the earth. Now, verse number 14, he continues telling Noah, make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. So it's going to have that natural slime mortar petrochemical that will sometimes seep onto the surface of the earth. It's going to be filled with that, which is going to be able to hold out water. And this is the fashion, verse 15 says, which thou shalt make of it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above. And the door of the ark shalt thou set on the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. So God gives Noah the plans, because Noah doesn't know what an ark is. There aren't arks around the corner that he goes, oh yeah, I saw one over there. Yeah, I can copy that. There aren't boats. There aren't arks. They don't have any of that stuff. Well, maybe there's some boats that people have already fashioned on the coastlines, that are on the border of where the coasts are, because there is a coastline clearly. But there are no arks, and so God has to give him the plans. Much like there was no tabernacle in the days of Moses, there was no tabernacle anywhere in the world. Moses didn't know how to make a tabernacle. God had to give him the plans. And so he gets the plans from God with the material that he's going to use, which is this gopher wood, with the sealant that he's going to use, and God would have made an abundant supply for him somewhere.
Will you please call our at 210
Hold on one sec.
247-8270?
Sorry.
Thank you.
So God gives him the plans, and then he also gives him the dimensions of it in verse 15. 300 cubits is going to be the length of it. A cubit is about 18 to 21 inches. It's generally the amount of distance from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger is generally how a cubit is described. So if you just call it 18 inches, which is the shorter end of the cubit, 300 cubits is 300 1.5 feet, which is 450 feet. You go, well, how long is that? Well, a football field is 300 feet. So it's 1.5 football fields long. And 50 cubits wide, which is 75 feet wide. 75 feet. Yipes, that's 25 yards. Okay? That's a pretty good ways across, although it's much longer, clearly. And 30 cubits high is 45 feet tall. That's about 4.5 stories tall. That's a pretty big boat. Now, they have a life-size building of the ark. I mean, you can see a life-size, fully dimensional, and totally in scale version of this in Kentucky. It's huge. I've never been there, and I've always wanted to go, and I'll make it there one day. But I haven't been in that neck of the woods to be able to go yet. If and when I am, I'll go. Till then, it's huge. And you go, oh, that's awful big. But if you're going to bring all these animals in, as we all know they're going to do, then I guess you need something pretty big. But that's how big it is, and that's how Noah got the instructions on how to do it. So he is to put one window up at the top of it, and the window gets used later on, as we will read later. Verse 17, and behold, even I do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. Now, God tells Noah, I'm going to flood the earth with water. I'm going to completely totally flood it, and I'm going to destroy all flesh through this flood. Because you can't breathe when you're not, well, obviously, unless you're a fish, you can't breathe if you're in water. So everything, God tells him, is going to die. He goes, but I'm going to keep you. I'm going to establish my covenant with you. So God's promises that he made back in Genesis 3 about the seed of the woman come through, obviously, Adam and Eve, come through not Abel, not Cain, not any of the other many children they had, but through Seth. And not just through any of Seth's children, but ultimately down the line through Noah. And God says, I'm going to make my covenant with you. I'm going to establish what I've already said through you. So God will perfectly fulfill exactly what he said he's going to do. But he's going to do it with a pure human being, and that pure human being is going to be Noah. And notice that he says, you and your sons and your wives will come into the ark. You'll be safe. With you guys, I'll replenish the earth. Now, God could have just killed them all, including Noah, and made a whole new set. But he chose to fulfill his word and use Noah and his family instead. And he could have also created a whole new set of animals. Instead, he's taking of the ones that exist 2 by 2. 2 animals of each kind, and you'll notice that it is a male and a female. That is obviously the proper order that God had planned all along for humanity and for all living things. It is a perversion of the laws of God to try and mate and, male with male or female with female. And you can read about that a little bit more in Romans chapter 1, latter part of the chapter, by the way. So he says 2 by 2, they're going to come into the ark of every sort of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind. 2 of every sort shall come unto thee to keep them alive. You'll notice that God says you're going to put 2 of every possible living thing that exists, male and female, and they will come to you. Notice that in verse number 20. 2 of every sort shall come unto thee. In other words, Noah's not going to have to go out and start trying to round up animals and saying, okay, now, checklist, what are we missing? Oh, we don't got a hippopotamus. Oh, we need to go get a hippo. Where are we going to find a hippo? God brought the animals to him, which is obviously, the only way you can make sure that everything's on board. Now, how on earth is God going to fit all of these animals on the ark? And by the way, what exactly are the animals that are there? Well, all of the animals that God created. Does that include the dinosaurs? That includes the dinosaurs. You go, but wait a minute, how can that possibly be? Man and dinosaurs never lived together. That's a lie. That is a lie that comes straight from the pit of hell. And I know that sounds dramatic, and I'm sorry. I'm not trying to sound dramatic. But that's how the devil works. That's what we learned when he attacked Eve in Genesis chapter 3. He always questions the word of God. That is the way that he has always worked, and he still works today. God created all living things. Everything after the creation was good. There was no death because there was no sin yet. Sin didn't come until Genesis 3. It's at that point that death comes into the world. The dinosaurs were there with Noah before the fall. And they're there at this time too. Now, I don't have the ability to be able to take some of the stuff that I actually do have on this computer to share with you as part of this study. But I've got all kinds of photographs of Inca pottery, Nazcan Indian pottery, etchings on petroglyphs of humans and dinosaurs living together. In fact, about a third of the pottery that they have discovered from the Incas and the Nazcan Indians, about a third depict dinosaurs on them. And they're accurate renditions of dinosaurs. Well, how can that be? You and I think we know what a dinosaur looks like because we have all seen Jurassic Park or maybe gone to a museum. But these Nazca Indians didn't go to any museum, and they didn't see Jurassic Park either. And their pictures are very, very accurate. And that's because they lived together at the same time. And so dinosaurs would have been part of what is coming into the ark at this time. And mind you, they don't have to be a fully grown woolly mammoth or a fully grown Tyrannosaurus Rex. They could have come in twos, male and female, in teenage version or even smaller, and there would have been plenty of room for all of the animal kingdom that way. And God would have made sure they survived. And of course, the world, like I said, is a very different world after the flood. They're going to find than the one they were living in before, which is another issue for another day. But nonetheless, this is all of the animals, and that includes the dinosaur world and all these so-called extinct animals that we all talk about today. All of them came. Verse 21 says, "And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them." So he's told to gather up and store up a bunch of food so that everybody and everything can eat. Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so did he. And that is the instructions to Noah in chapter number 6. We will continue with this in chapter number 7 because, well, there's going to be a little bit more that God tells Noah before the flood actually begins. So till then, I hope you have a really good day. I know this was a little longer than normal, and I apologize for that. Have a blessed one. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.